City Suns talk. Brennan and Damian, like 18 on the run, the way you containing them. All the latest from coming to the Suns, inside information and getting it done. For Phoenix Sports, they number one. Kinda like Booker, yeah, they on the rise. Come and see it's all things Phoenix. Spurs City Suns talk, we going live.
Welcome to episode 5 of the Burn City Suns Talk podcast, brought to you by Burn City Sports. My name is Brendan Mao, and over there we have Damian Adams from Burn City Sports. So, Damian, what are we going to bring the viewers today on this episode?
So, man, I'm very excited for today's episode. We have a big episode for you guys. So, of course, we have to preview tomorrow night's game against the San Antonio Spurs for the Phoenix Suns. We're going to go over our first week impressions and give grades of all the rotation players and Frank Vogel, along with maybe doing an around the NBA segment. Of course, the big news around the NBA right now is James Harden, so hopefully we can get to that at the end of the show. But we got to start with the game from last night, the shocking loss, where the Phoenix Suns lost to the San Antonio Spurs 115-114. What were your overall thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I mean, when the Suns came out, you thought it was going to be a repeat of what happened Saturday against Utah. The Suns just dominated that game from start to finish, and that's exactly what it looked like it was going to be against the Spurs. They just looked overmatched compared to the Suns, but that's not what ended up happening. Even though the Suns allowed 45 points in the first half, the Spurs got really hot in the second half there, especially in the fourth quarter. A lot of the players, Coach Vogel post-game talked about how well the Spurs shot from deep, and that was really killer for the Suns. Just the Suns weren't playing like that bad at defense. The Spurs were just connecting on their shots, and it was just like everyone on the Suns seemed to have a pretty good game, and they still lost. So they were up 20, and then at the very end of the game, the Spurs got the first lead of the game, and that was it for the Suns. So just a tough loss to grasp for the Suns.
Yeah, definitely a tough loss. You mentioned that hot shooting from the San Antonio Spurs. They shot 55% from the field in the second half, 45% from behind the three-point line in that second half. And a big part of that, of course, was Devin Vassell in that second half. He went off. For the game, he had 18 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, and 3 steals. Went 7-17 from the field. Keldon Johnson was also big for the San Antonio Spurs, 27 points, 4 assists on 0 turnovers, shot 50% from the field as well, and 4 of 9 from the three-point line. But they weren't the only players that played well in this one. We got to talk about our man Kevin Durant as well.
Yeah, I mean, how about KD? Once again, he had to carry the Suns. You see him here. What did you want from this game? Him versus Victor Wembanyama. So here he goes at the end of the first quarter to beat the buzzer on the shot clock, and that really got the crowd into it. Here's another one where the Suns push in transition. This is at the very beginning of the game. He gets an easy dunk, put him up 4-0, forced the Spurs to call a timeout less than a minute into the game. And, yeah, I mean, just overall, I mean, KD was balling last night. I mean, you see these stats. Once again, another problem for him was turnovers, but that's what's going to happen when you have him being the primary ball handler. But, yeah, I mean, these shots are just typical KD fashion. I mean, this one was absolutely nasty, just break his ankles. You thought that would be the play of the game, and the Suns won because that was late in the fourth quarter. But, yeah, I mean, KD was doing everything for the Suns last night, and they relied on him too much, I think. I think that's what really cost them. And we saw that in similar fashion to the Lakers game. I mean, you compared it to that because of that fourth quarter collapse. You could see Damian's short recap of the game last night on our Instagram page. But, yeah, I mean, what comparisons do you see between this and the Lakers game?
Exactly what you said about Kevin Durant having too much on his shoulders, right? And with the Lakers, what they were able to do is load up their defense against Kevin Durant, where it made it very hard for him to see the open lanes and see open passes. Now, the similar thing that San Antonio has with the LA Lakers is length, right? The LA Lakers have Anthony Davis and Christian Wood and Jackson Hayes, all these guys who are very long, very tall. Speaking of very long and very tall, the Spurs have Victor Wembanyama. So along with him, they also bring out Zach Collins and people like that who bring length to the table when it comes to that. And at one point during the game, they went to a 3-2 zone where they had 7-4 Victor Wembanyama at the top of that zone, which really just brings a different dynamic of what you're going to see as an offense. I think that kind of slowed down the Suns a little bit in that second half, and that's why in the third and fourth quarters, that was a big part of San Antonio outscoring the Suns in both of those quarters.
Yeah, it's just when you look back on that game, another thing that was brought up post-game by Coach Frank Vogel and the Suns was that third quarter. At the beginning of the third quarter, they had to wait like 15 minutes to start it because there was a problem with the shot clocks. They had to transition to using shot clocks on the baseline instead of the ones above the hoop that they usually use. So that really stopped the game, and the Suns kind of lost momentum after that, but I don't think that's something you can blame. But obviously, the big play of last night was the end of the game. So you could see, we'll show it here, the end of the game moment with Kevin Durant.
Yeah, they fouled him. The refs didn't call it. They whack him on the arm, okay, before the ball gets ripped out of his hands. No call, but in a situation like that, we try to get the ball in a quick inbounds to our 90% free throw shooter, and we did, but it didn't work out.
I still got to hold on to the ball. Just got to hold on to it.
Yeah, so looking at that play, having a day to let it marinate and really look over it, do you think that was a foul, and did the refs miss it?
Yeah, so on the 2-minute report, which the league releases for games that are under 3 points in the last 2 minutes, that was ruled a correct no call. Yeah. So when you look at it, it's hard to tell. I think the league ruled it a no call because he said it was incidental contact. Like KD was moving forward and Trey Jones just happened to swipe him across the face when he was going for the ball. So, but in my book, that's a foul still.
Well, yeah, you would think being swiped across the face would, garner a foul call. But in this year, you've seen a lot around the NBA, them saying things like incidental contact or marginal contact, where when they review plays and they're saying, okay, there was contact. We're not saying that it wasn't. We're not refuting that, but we're saying that the contact was so marginal that it shouldn't have stopped what was going on in this play, or it didn't affect the shot, or in this case, it shouldn't have been what caused Kevin Durant to lose the ball. So they're saying there was contact, but Kevin Durant should have still held on to the ball, and that's what Kevin Durant said at the press conference.
Yeah, you saw him after the game, what he said there, that he has to hold on to the ball. He also called it a bad loss, to paraphrase what he said. But, yeah, it's just a tough way to lose, especially after controlling that game for so long, relying on Kevin Durant. But two other guys from the Suns that stood out were Grayson Allen and Eric Gordon for the second straight game. Yeah. And all three of them that talked post-game, Vogel, Durant, and Eric Gordon, talked about how there's a lot of positives to take away from this game, with it being the fourth game of the season. Who really cares when, as Vogel said, it's a marathon. When you look at the season in general, you're going to lose some games you're supposed to win. You're going to win some games you're supposed to lose. And I think that's exactly what the Suns dealt with last night. But, yeah, Grayson Allen was just on fire last night. He was 5 of 6 from three-point range in the first half. He led all scorers at the break. Eric Gordon, another 20-point night, was huge for the Suns. So just those two guys have really stepped up after struggling the first couple games when fans were like, what are we going to get out of these guys? But now you see them really stepping in for the injured Devin Booker and Bradley Beal.
Yeah, no, they both stepped up in a big way in this game and in the previous game against the Utah Jazz, shooting the ball at just a much better rate. That's what you need from those two guys. You need those guys to shoot the ball well. And I also think you need those guys to be better playmakers as we kind of move forward here into our preview of what we could see on Thursday night against the San Antonio Spurs. What do you think the Suns can do differently in this game to get the victory?
Yeah, well, first you got to start off with the big news that Devin Booker's now upgraded to questionable for tomorrow. So I think that would definitely help if Booker's back. So we'll see. The Suns are being very tight-lipped, as we know they usually are, about their injuries. So Devin Booker at the World Series right now, though, and we've seen him working out without an ankle brace on, so that's an encouraging sign, just seeing the way he's moving around at practice. You can go check out some of our footage from practice. I post all of it the past couple days from shoot around yesterday and then Monday's practice as well. So you could see Devin Booker and Bradley Beal rehabbing their injuries. Yesterday, Coach Vogel talked about there's no real timetable for their returns, which was kind of concerning for Suns fans. But at the same time, Suns are always very questionable about their injury. So we'll see what ends up happening there. But hopefully Booker's back tomorrow. So that would obviously be a huge boost to the Suns. But yeah, I mean, I think the most interesting thing outside of those two, if they're back, is can the Suns come out strong again like they did last night and then sustain it, or will the Spurs going to keep up their momentum from the end of the game? So you want to see the Suns just come out and dominate again, but at the same time, you know the Spurs can turn it around, and they could just start out hot tomorrow. So I think those are two big things to watch tomorrow.
Yeah, for sure. You want to see if that momentum carries over for the Spurs. If you're a Spurs fan, you want to see that. But for the Suns, I think the big thing they can do differently in the fourth quarter is use Kevin Durant more as an outlet or decoy. So one of the things that I've seen is that Eric Gordon and Grayson Allen can run the pick and roll. So let's say if it's Drew Eubanks or Yusuf Nurkic at center, and they're running pick and roll, high pick and roll with Gordon or Allen, and you have Kevin Durant in the corner. If you have Kevin Durant in the corner, whoever's defending Kevin Durant has to stay over there. And it opens up the court so much for whatever action you're trying to do. There was a play earlier in the game where Nasir Little hit a three. And it was actually a Kogi who set a pick for Eric Gordon. Eric Gordon got going downhill. The defender left Little in that corner. Gordon passed to Little, hits a three. Now, no disrespect to Little, but if it's Kevin Durant out there, they're not leaving Kevin Durant. So if you have Kevin Durant in those type of plays, and now the defense can't just all hunker down on Kevin Durant. Now, of course, this changes if Devin Booker is playing, but just going and assuming he doesn't play in this one, you have to be able to switch up who is the playmaker and who is the one initiating the action for the team in the fourth quarter so that you're not outscored 33-19 in the fourth quarter the way they were last night. So you definitely want to have changes there. Defensively, I think when it comes to somebody getting hot like a Vassell or Keldon Johnson, maybe more switching. And you can switch more if you have Drew Eubanks out there. If you have Yusuf Nurkic out there, you have to play drop defense, which means that the center drops on pick and roll, and you're asking the person who's guarding the initial ball handler to get back around the pick to get in front. So if you have Eubanks out there, you're switching on the pick and roll. That means less open threes, but Eubanks has to be able to stay in front of these guys and not get broken down to where they get layups. So I think there's some little adjustments that can be made, but honestly, if they did what they did in the first three quarters, they'll win the game, but they have to be able to hold down that lead, unlike they did against the Lakers and Spurs last night.
Yeah, they just have to show multiple looks on offense, like you said. I know there's been some question marks of KD, why the Suns last year, they just stuck him in the corner. Fans were not happy with that. So you saw, especially in that Utah game, just to start out the game, I think KD had like 2 straight assists to start out. So when KD gets rolling in other facets of the game, that's when the game really opens up for the Suns. And you saw Eric Gordon last night, 6 assists. Grayson Allen, too, has proven that both of them, that they can be playmakers and handle the ball, which was question marks, and even I had questions for that going in. But I think as the season's gone on, even though they're 4 games in, they've had to take on these larger roles without Devin Booker, without Bradley Beal. So you're seeing them really evolve their offense. So, yeah, when it comes to that fourth quarter, they've really not been there. So how do you get them more involved? Like you said, if they are more of the primary ball handlers on some possessions, not every possession. I think they need to mix up looks there because obviously you want the ball and somehow in KD's hands. So
For sure.
you have to mix it up there. And I think, they're being very one-dimensional on offense when it seemed like the Spurs, they have a good coach in Greg Popovich. They figured out what the Suns are doing on offense with KD and adjusted to it. And what worked against the Jazz, but worked against the Spurs in the first half just didn't work in that fourth quarter.
Yeah, in the fourth quarter that teams are going to hunker down more defensively, especially if they're down, and they're going to go down to what is their go-to plan defensively. And that's what you saw in both the Spurs and Lakers games where they were able to hunker down and really load up on Kevin Durant. So that's why I think they should throw in those different looks where Eric Gordon and Grayson Allen can initiate the offense. And I think that could lead to a victory for them. And honestly, they should be able to beat the Spurs by more than 15 points coming into this game after making the adjustments from last night's game. Do you think I'm being a little bit too presumptuous in saying that they can win by 15 points?
I mean, I thought that was exactly going to be the case last night, which it didn't end up happening. So, yeah, I mean, I expected it again just because of the talent level. I mean, me and you talked about this during the game. Keita Bates-Diop. I mean, maybe we could have another discussion about why he should be in the game because he's playing his old team. But on the Spurs, he's a starter. On the Suns, he's not even a rotation player without Devin Booker and Bradley Beal. I mean, there might be some argument why he should be in the rotation, but when you have that level of talent discrepancy between the two teams, that's something to note even without Devin Booker and Bradley Beal, just because the Suns are such a veteran team. You know, the Spurs have more continuity. Most of their guys have been together longer, and they just added Victor Wembanyama into the mix. So, I mean, overall, when you look at these two teams, it's just very hard to see why the Suns shouldn't beat them even without Devin Booker and Bradley Beal.
Yes, I definitely agree with you on that. So now let's get into what we think about this team so far this year. So what we're going to do is we're going to give our individual grades on our first week impressions for all the players that are in the rotation, along with all the coach as well, to just let you know exactly what we think about the first week. And we know short sample size, but we're just going to give you our first week impressions and give grades. Then maybe we'll do it again in a month or so, or maybe 20 games. We'll decide, when we're going to do the increments of these grades. But let's start with Kevin Durant. So far this year, he's averaging 27.3 points per game, 7 rebounds, 4.8 assists per game, along with 4.3 turnovers per game, 1.5 steals and 0.8 blocks on 51% shooting from the field, 28% from three, which is not, your normal KD type of stat line, and 79% from the free throw line, which is also below KD's standards on 7.3 free throw attempts per game. So looking at Kevin Durant throughout the first 4 games, what grade would you give Kevin Durant?
For me, I would give him an A-. I saw a stat today. I don't remember exactly what it is, but just the plus-minus discrepancy when KD's on the floor versus when he's not. Yeah. And then the Suns' offensive rating as well just drops significantly when KD's not on the floor. But the reason I can't go higher than an A- is because of those turnovers, like you pointed out, and the fact that the Suns should have won the second in last night's game. So when you look at that, it's always going to be attributed back to the star player. Yeah. Which I don't know if you could say that it's KD's fault, but he definitely could have done more, which he's being asked to do a lot at age 35. So it's tough to say there, but I would give him an A- and not higher, mostly because of those turnover numbers. And the Suns are 2-2 when he's been their best player. That's not 4-0. Yeah. That's what I would give him an A+ if the Suns were 4-0. For sure. But they're 2-2, and he's been the number one option every single night except for the first game. So when you have your star player, I would just give him an A-, even though he's carried the Suns. But he has those little problems, which I would not knock him majorly down for. But yeah, just an A- for me.
Man, I'm not gonna lie to you. I wish you was my teacher in school. I had a better GPA, man. I feel like he was a little light on the grade there. I went with a B. The reason I went with a B is some of the things that you mentioned, the turnovers, right? He had 8 against the LA Lakers. He's averaging 4.3 game this season, shooting only 28% from three-point line, which you definitely expect him to be a better shooter from three-point line. And free throw line, 73% or 79%, from the free throw line for him is definitely low for him. So because of the shooting below expectations at the three-point line, free throw line, and the turnovers, I went with a B. But he definitely is doing some great things, like you mentioned, carrying the offense without Devin Booker and Bradley Beal there, being able to be the facilitator at certain points, and when the spacing is correct, which they've talked about they've been working on throughout the season, getting that spacing right, you can see when the spacing is correct, he makes better decisions because he has more space to make those decisions. So I think that it's not his fault, but because of the team effort around him and him succumbing to some of the team failures, I gave him a B. So now let's move on to Jusuf Nurkic. All right, Jusuf Nurkic was one of the big additions this offseason, came over in the DeAndre Ayton trade. Basically, that was the big part of the trade, him for DeAndre Ayton. And at Media Day, we heard a lot that it was a better fit having Nurkic there instead of DeAndre Ayton, even though DeAndre Ayton may be naturally more talented. Now, so far this year, he's playing 27 minutes a game, averaging 10 points per game, 10.5 rebounds, 4 assists per game, shooting 41% from the floor, 27% from three, 84% from the free throw line on 3.3 free throw attempts per game. So throughout the first 4 games, what grade would you give Jusuf Nurkic?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because I think Ayton wouldn't have done much better than Nurkic, just when you mentioned that. So I don't even think he would be better at all for this team right now.
Yeah.
So I think that you're seeing that Nurkic is a better fit. But when you look at this whole body of work, and I think for me, it's really a comparison to the rest of the team in terms of Nurkic's grade. I gave him a C, even though he had a really good game last night, and he finished with 12 points and 12 rebounds last night. So when you look at that game, it was pretty good. He also had a good first game against the Warriors. But the big thing with him has been foul trouble. He had 5 fouls the first 2 games, 4 last night. So how can he stay out of foul trouble? Me and you talked about it before the season that Nurkic isn't really going to – he's just not as effective when the big three's not all on the floor, at least 2 of them. So when he has Devin Booker and Bradley Beal, you could see a huge step in his offensive game, as you saw in the first game. I mean, you know he's a capable playmaker. You know that he can rebound the ball, which has been huge. And if we're just grading his rebounding, I give it an A. But his whole body of work, I mean, he hasn't been like extremely bad, but there's been definitely some bad nights. I mean, the Lakers game really sticks out to me. He was 1 of 5 in that game. Anthony Davis really shut him down. He only had 4 points, but yeah, I mean, he's averaging 10.5 rebounds per game. So when you look at his whole body of work, I just think that he gets the lowest grade just because he's been the most inconsistent. So if you look at his points, it's 14 points in the first game, 4 in the second, 10 in the third, and then 12 last night. So you want to see more production from him offensively. Without Devin Booker and Bradley Beal, he should be averaging over 15 points per game without those 2 out there.
I can agree with that. I went with a C+ for him because of the inconsistency. He's been very up and down, like you mentioned, and how you just pointed out there how he's been up and down at production. And for me, his defense has been very on and off as far as what he can do. You mentioned against the Lakers how he played bad offensively. He was also bad defensively in that game. Part of that was the foul trouble. Against more athletic bigs, it seemed like he has trouble, right? And then if you ask him to switch, or you're asking him to come out and hedge, you can see times where he's not able to get out there. That's one of the reasons that the Spurs got to shooting in a hot kind of way in that second half, is because he couldn't get out there. And he couldn't defend on those screens when they were going out for those 3-point shots. Now, some of those were just some dynamic threes that were being made. You think about the step back that Vassell made to get the game to 3 points. Like, some of that's just, you can't beat it. Sometimes, great offense is going to be great defense. But with Nurkic at times, because he's not the quickest of feet, you see that he is just outmatched athletically at times. So because of that, I went with a C+ for Jusuf Nurkic. So now let's go to Josh Okogie, who, when he come about, defense, he's the total opposite of Jusuf Nurkic. Very quick feet, very good hands, somebody who is always making an impact on that end of the floor and has been making an impact on the offensive end as well, averaging 11.3 points per game, shooting 53% from the floor, 36% from 3. That's on almost 3 attempts per game from the 3-point line, and playing 29 minutes a game. So looking at Josh Okogie throughout the first 4 games, what grade would you give him?
For me, I give Josh an A- just because I didn't give anyone else on the team over an A-. So I'd have him right at the top there of performers on this team just because he's been the perfect 5th starter. There's just been some little inconsistencies. I think it was last night he did not start off shooting well at all. And I was like, is this the Josh Okogie that we saw last year? But then he really changed the game around he made that 1-3. I think he started 0 for 4, 0 for 5, and then he connected on a triple. So, but, I mean, overall, you talk about defense. He's been the best defender by far on the Suns. Whether he's guarding Steph Curry, LeBron James, or he's guarding off ball. You saw him have that nice off the ball block last night. Who I forget who that was on, but yeah, he's just been a consummate good starter for the Suns. They can rely on him for attacking the paint, which I think he needs to do more of because you saw how effective he can be in that first game against the Warriors when he does do that. And when you talk about defense, I think he's kind of similar to Mikal Bridges when he was here and he finished like second in Defensive Player of the Year voting, because he's not going to have a really high like steal number. He might get some, like someone like Jordan Goodwin is going to have higher because he goes for the ball more often. Josh just plays really good on the ball defense. He doesn't really try to swipe at you as much. He just does a good job of staying in front of you. He only averages 0.3 steals per game this year, but he has averaged 0.8 blocks per game. So he had 2 last night as well. So when you look at him, just overall shooting 36.4% from deep. So he's been a much better three-point shooter. The Suns as a team have not been that good from deep, but yeah, I mean 53.5% from the floor for a defensive guy. That's overall. So he's been really good, and he's really carried them in some games, especially that first game against the Warriors with his play.
Yeah, and I totally agree with everything that you said about Josh Okogie. He's been balling out this year. You mentioned that for a defensive guy to be shooting over 50% from the field, especially a guard or a wing to be shooting over 50% from the field, is a definite major plus for you, because you don't normally get that type of shooting percentage from those guys. You normally get that from the Yusef Nurkic's of the world, and he's one of the reasons I gave him a C+ is because he had 41% so far for the year. So for Josh Okogie to be at 53% and over 35% from three really shows you the improvement he's made with his jump shot and the offensive rebounds. He's been a killer coming in, crashing the boards, getting offensive rebounds, getting extra possessions for the Phoenix Suns. And defensively, like you mentioned, always a hound, always being there, just making plays happen. So I'm right there with you. I gave him an A-. And the reason I gave him a higher grade than Durant is because I feel like he's excelling at his role better than Durant. Of course, Durant's the better player, but Durant is expected to do more. So his grade is going to be a little bit harder. His scale is going to be a little bit higher than Josh Okogie's for me. So now let's talk about Eric Gordon. So Eric Gordon was supposed to be the sixth man, but he started 3 or 4 games due to injury this year, playing so far 31 minutes per game. Hopefully once the team is back together and as soon, he'll be back down to regular 6-man minutes. But so far this year, averaging 16.5 points per game, 2.8 assists, shooting 45% from the field and 33% from 3. Is shooting 100% from the free throw line, but that's only on 0.3 free throw attempts per game. So definitely is a very, very small sample size on the free throws there. So far this year, what grade would you give Eric Gordon?
Yeah, I mean, I had him the same as Okogie. I did an A-. Like I said before, those were the highest grades I gave to the Suns were A-. So why I have Gordon that high is because of the way he's played in the past 2 games. He didn't start off the season well. Yeah. And if he kept up the way he did in the first 2 games, I would have him much lower. But I think he's really shown what he brings to the table. And the reason I have him so high is because he's doing this, he's starting when he's not even going to be a regular starter on this team, whether either Beal or Booker gets back. So he's going to be sent to the bench for whichever one of them comes back first. So I think when you have him playing at this high of a level as he has the past 2 games, that's just scary for opposing teams when you have a weapon like this off the bench. Yeah. And to be as effective as he is right now in the starting lineup. So I just think when you look at Eric Gordon and 20 points last night. He had 20 points in the first half against the Jazz. He's just been really good, the Eric Gordon that we all expected coming here the past 2 games. And, yeah, I don't think you can really grade him off those first 2 games just because it's early in the season. He's thrust into a larger role than he was expecting. But, yeah, I mean, he just, ever since he got here, what I liked even those first 2 games is his willingness to be a difference maker on this team, especially on the offensive end. I mean, he came in the first game, he was like 4-15 shooting, but he still showed that willingness to shoot. And then when Booker was announced to be out, you knew that he was going to come out firing. And while I said it was bad at the beginning of the year that he was taking that many shots, I think it still could be bad if Booker and Beal are playing, but right now that's exactly what they need, and I think just his willingness to be an attacker on the offensive end has really made a difference for the Suns.
I definitely agree with the fact that you want him to be aggressive. You want him to attack. That's his job. That's what he does. He's supposed to come in off the bench and be the guy to provide that instant offense for you. Now, that instant offense has to be efficient to be effective. And in the first 2 games, he definitely wasn't efficient. You mentioned how in the first game he went 4 for 16. Now, he did hit a big 3 late in that game to help them win that one, but he has to be better than 4 of 16. And the second game, he wasn't that efficient either. So because of the first 2 games, I went with a B plus or a B minus, because of those first 2 games. Now, the second 2 games definitely raised it. If he, like you mentioned, was still struggling and wasn't playing like he is capable of, he would have been down on the grade there. But I love the aggressiveness. I love how he stepped into making more of a playmaking type of role in this last game with the 6 assists, like you mentioned. And I think that he'll continue to play well. I think that he had to shake off that slump in the first 2 games. He's done that. And now we'll start to see even better Eric Gordon going forward, especially once he comes into his role of coming off the bench and being the future 6th man of the year, like I picked before. So hopefully he does that for me, all right? So now let's get into Grayson Allen. Grayson Allen is averaging the same amount of minutes as Eric Gordon at 31 minutes per game. He's at 10.8 points per game, 5.3 rebounds, 3 assists, 1.5 turnovers per game, shooting 42% from the field and 43% from 3. He's also 100% from the free throw line on 1.5 free throw attempts per game. So far for Grayson Allen, what grade would you give him?
Yeah, I give Grayson a B. I just think those first 2 games were really bad for him.
Yeah.
I mean, 0 points in the season opener, and he got benched for Eric Gordon in that game. So I think he's been much better the past few games, or really the past 2 games, even though in LA he did have 6 rebounds and 4 assists, but only had 6 points. I expected him to come out much stronger, but at these past 2 games he has, and that's why I didn't give him a lower grade. But I just think, even comparing him to Eric Gordon, he was much worse those first 2 games. He was like the worst player on the floor those first 2 games. So when you factor that in, it's really tough to give him anything higher than a B. But yeah, I mean, when you look at him, I mean, he's been good for the Suns the past 2 games. I mean, he's 17 points on Saturday and 19 points last night. He's really shouldered some of the offensive load without Devin Booker and Bradley Beal, and he's been exactly the player that the Suns need from him the past 2 games. So I'm just looking forward to seeing him keep it up.
For sure. I definitely agree with that the last 2 games he's really stepped up in a major way. Last night was killing it from 3. You mentioned earlier 5 for 6 from 3-point line in that game last night, and that was a big part of them getting that huge lead that unfortunately they squandered, but it was a big part of them getting that lead in the first place. And in the first 2 games, he seemed hesitant. Right? Seemed like he didn't really believe in his shot, especially in that first game where he's had 0 points. He just didn't seem to have it. And it was really disappointing coming out of a really good preseason for him where you're like, okay, I see Grayson driving to the goal, being dynamic, being a playmaker. I even asked him about, is this something that he had an emphasis on going into the year, driving to the rim and doing these things. And, we had a funny moment about Dwayne Wade being his favorite player and how, maybe he was getting back to that younger Grayson Allen that looked up to, Dwayne Wade. But you need him to be that shooter, but you also need him to attack closeouts. So he can't just sit there and wait for a 3. Once he gets the ball, he knows they're going to be coming at him because he's one of the guys that defenses have to lay off of him to try to bring more attention to Kevin Durant, bring more attention to Devin Booker and Bradley Beal when they play. So he has to be able to attack those closeouts when they come out, trying to close out on him to stop those 3s and make the right passes. And he's done that the last 2 games. So because of that, I gave him a B- as well. I think that he's been able to redeem himself in the first 2 games. So now let's get into maybe the most popular player on the Phoenix Suns, Yuta Watanabe. He has been playing very, very well, 18.3 minutes per game, averaging 7.3 points per game, 3 rebounds, shooting 45% from the field and 43% from 3. And this is on 4 3-point attempts per game. So through the first 4 games, what grade would you give Yuta?
Yeah, I give Yuta a B+, just because he's really come in and played the exact role that the Suns want him to play. He's been that 3-point shooter, like you said, but yeah, I mean, he's just come in and he's really played well next to Kevin Durant or in place of Kevin Durant when Kevin Durant's not on the floor, and his defense has really stood out as well, but I can't give him anything more than a B+, just because he had that one bad game against Utah. He only shot 1 of 4 from deep. So if you're grading it off of 4 games, I think that one bad game brings him down from a from an A- to a B+ for me, just because he's been really good the other 3 games though, and I think, like I said, his defense, especially on the ball, I didn't think he could be that good of an on-ball defender, but you're really seeing that. So yeah, I would give him a B+ so far.
Okay, yeah, we're agreeing a lot today. I went B+ as well. All the things you mentioned, on-ball defense is being better. Also, his off-ball defense. You've mentioned that Frank Vogel has talked about him before and talked about how he calls him just a very smart player, very heady on defense. He may not have, the natural gift of the athleticism that Josh Okogie has, where he can move his feet and stay in front of people in that same way. Or the same thing you could say about Jordan Goodwin. But when it comes to him, he's been able to put that effort forward and stay in front of people and also have good plays. Like against the Warriors, he had a backside block on Chris Paul that led to a transition bucket. Those type of plays really go a long way in winning games. And of course, shooting lights out, that's what you want him to do. So I gave him a B+ as well. So now let's talk about Drew Eubanks. He got posterized last night, but outside of that, I feel like he's been playing pretty well. 18.3 minutes per game, 5.3 points per game. Averaging 1.8 blocks per game in limited minutes. That's really impressive. 6.3 rebounds and shooting 60% from the field. So far this season, what grade would you give Drew Eubanks?
I gave him a B, just because there's been some times where I don't know why the Suns bench him. They benched him against the Lakers, but I think that's just because sometimes he goes way too hard in his minutes. So I just think sometimes he needs to settle down. But yeah, I mean, overall, he's been such a good player for the Suns. One of the best backup centers in the NBA, especially in this system. Like I've said, he fits the Suns so perfectly just because he's a perfect player for Frank Vogel's system, and he's played with Yusuf Nurkic before, so he knows how to back him up. But yeah, I mean, he's only had 1 game where he scored over 4 points, so I couldn't give him anything over a B. He did have a really good game on Saturday against the Jazz with 12 points, and he's been stuffing his stat sheet in other areas as well. I mean, as you said before, 1.8 blocks per game, and 3 of the 4 games he's had over 2 blocks. So when you look at that and his rebounding numbers at 6.3 boards per game, as well as he had 4 assists last night, and he's had over 2 assists in every single game so far. So I think when you look at the other aspects of the game, he's been really good. And, yeah, like I said, he just needs to chill out a little bit at some point. So, yeah, I gave him a B.
Yeah, now he's definitely one of those guys who's going to go 100% the entire time he's in. And that's something for a bigger guy that's hard to do, right? Because just at that size, it's hard to have the crazy cardio to do the things that he tries to do. But you appreciate it because you need somebody who's going to come off the bench and do that. You know, in those 18 minutes he's going to give you everything that he has. You have to appreciate that for sure. So I went with a B as well because 1.8 blocks per game on 18 minutes is really, really good. Like, that's extreme production on defensive end. And if he's blocking 2 blocks a game, that means he's affecting a lot more shots than that, because now you're thinking about it when you go in, when you see him there, like, oh, Eubanks is here, he may block this. Unless you're 7'4" and you could dunk on him. Outside of that, you're thinking about him being there at the rim to block your dunk or block your layup. And I love the rebounding as well. 6 rebounds on 18 minutes is very, very good. Very good rate of rebounding. So you have to appreciate what he's doing. I know that they want him to be able to switch, and we've seen him do it good at some times and not so good at other times. The Golden State game kind of stands out where Steph Curry and Chris Paul tried to seek and destroy him somewhat. But I think that he kind of adjusted from that game on how he's going to guard guards in those type of situations. And I like that adjustment that he's made, so I gave him a B as well. So now let's get to our last player before we get to Frank Vogel, and that's Jordan Goodwin, who has been out here balling for sure. Jordan Goodwin, 21 minutes per game, 8.5 points per game, 4.8 rebounds, 2.5 assists. Shooting numbers, not the best, shooting 34% from the field and 23% from 3. What grade would you give Jordan Goodwin?
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned his shooting so far, but he's been thrust into such a big role offensively, which I don't think he was expecting. So I'm not really too concerned with his shooting numbers, but I give him an A- just because he's been – I didn't know what to expect from him. I mean, coming in, they have such a veteran team that he's kind of this young guy off the bench who's not very experienced. When you look at guys like Grayson Allen and Eric Gordon, who are going to be coming off the bench when Devin Booker and Bradley Beal come back. So it'll be interesting to see if Goodwin still plays then. But, yeah, I mean, overall he's just been really good, I think, in my opinion, just because, I mean, two straight games with over 10 points against the Lakers and the Jazz. And you're, like I said, you're not really expecting that scoring, but last night, 0 assists is not something that you can have from him, but he did have 5 assists against the Jazz. Those shooting numbers are problematic when you look at them, but his tenacity on defense, 1.3 steals per game, is really good. And yeah, I mean, me and you've said it. He looks so much like Josh Okogie out there, but like I said, he really goes for the ball a lot more on defense, and I think he brings exactly what the Suns need off the bench, and kind of that hybrid role of a Josh Okogie-like player and a point guard. So you want that off the bench when you're replacing guys like Devin Booker and Bradley Beal, to come in and really just control the pace on offense and then slow the game down on defense.
No, I definitely agree there with your analysis of what he did on defense, right? Always going for the ball. He's a master of timing the spin move. Whenever an offensive player is going in and they're going to spin to try to get a layup, he's a master at coming in right at that moment to reach for the ball. And that takes a good skill of timing and hands, right? Because a lot of people can think about doing that, but they're going to foul when they do it. And we saw him, in the preseason have a little problem with fouling, but it seems like he's kind of adjusted here for the regular season and been able to do a better job with that. Because of the shooting numbers, I went with a B, because 34% from the field and 23% from three is a little too low. Even if you're expecting him to not even, be effective or efficient, you're still expecting him to be decent enough to where you can put him out there. And if you're putting him out there for heavy minutes at, just for any amount of time, you want him to shoot better than that. So that's why I went with a B. But again, you're nicer than me, so you're giving better grades, and I have to appreciate that. So now let's get to Coach Frank Vogel. And looking at the Suns so far this year, 2-2 so far. Both losses have come when they've had double-digit leads going into the fourth quarter. And looking at their team rating so far, I know it's early in the year, but they are 17th in offense, scoring 110.8 points per game. 8th in defense, only allowing 105 points per game, and they're 11th in pace. Now, when I say pace, I'm talking about the amount of possessions you get per game and just playing as fast as possible or as slow as possible, depending on what you want to do. And he has talked about a lot how they want to play with pace. So I think 11th in pace is pretty good. So far, what grade would you give Coach Frank Vogel?
I give him a B so far. I think it's been really tough for him coming in, dealing with these injuries right away, to Devin Booker and Bradley Beal, but I would give him a lot higher if last night did not happen. I just think that was really tough. I mean, you have to fault the coach at some point for that. And him making excuses after the game of the shot clock not working properly in the third quarter and that making the Suns lose momentum, and then saying that KD was fouled at the end. I mean, however you want to look at it, it's still kind of making excuses. But, yeah, I mean, I just think he's done – overall, I think he's done a really good job, though. I mean, when you look at the whole body of work, when, like I mentioned, no Booker, no Beal, he's been really getting these guys to play. The fact that Grayson Allen and Eric Gordon turned it around so quick, the fact that guys are stepping off the bench like Yuta and Goodwin and even Nasir Little at some points, they're all buying into Vogel's system, and I think that's the biggest thing with him is you can see his system already. We're 4 games in, and you can see the Suns really wanting to buy in. But, yeah, I mean, last night was just tough, though, when you look at their defense, especially in that second half. So I think that is why I bumped him down from a A to a B, just because of last night's performance.
So you bumped him down from an A to a B. I bumped him down from a B to a C+. And you mentioned how he has been dealt a bad hand, right? No Booker, no Bill for most of the year so far. And you have to put that into account. But when it comes down to the things I'm looking for in coaching, defense is a big thing, right? And the team has been playing very good defense outside of, the fourth quarter last night. Very good defense so far, and that's his specialty is doing a good job at that. And I feel like the offense is also doing a good job of moving the ball, but when it comes to crunch time, I feel like they're not executing well. And that's a big part of coaching. So when you look at the fact that they have 2 games where they're up by more than 10 points going into the fourth quarter and they squander those leads and lose those games, that's something that you have to point at the coach for. Now, I understand if you have Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, or either or of those guys, you probably win those games because you have another playmaker out there, but he has to find a way to play with the hand that he's dealt and find what you can do out there. And that's why I mentioned like those different sets you can run where maybe Eric Gordon is the point guard or Grayson Allen's initiating offense, just to switch it up a little bit. So maybe my grade's a little harsh. You know, guys in the comments can let me know, but I'm gonna go with C+ for right now for Frank Vogel. So now let's get to our last segment here. Oh, no last segment tonight. We're going to get that next week as we go around the NBA, and also hopefully, you know, we'll be able to have some more participation with the audience as well next week. So we'll get into that as well if we have that. So we're going to go ahead and close out the show. Please let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, you can follow me on X or Twitter, as it was formerly known, at Brendan_Mal. So, yeah, I mean, just follow me. And then where can I find you, Damian?
So you can find me at The Real Deal WDA. That's The Real Deal, W as a whiskey, D as in Delta, A as in Alpha, on all social media platforms. You can find this podcast, Burn City Suns Talk, on the Burn City Sports YouTube channel. So if you are watching right now, please let your friends and family know. Let the people you like know. Let the people you don't like know, all right? We need everybody to go ahead and find this show so that you can have all the good Suns content, all right? And Burn City Sports is not just about the Suns. We cover the Cardinals, the Diamondbacks, the Phoenix Rising, Phoenix Mercury, everything Arizona State, anything Phoenix sports, we got you covered. So make sure you follow Burn City Sports on all social media platforms and check out burncitysports.com. And until next time, peace.